in what ways do different types of intermittent fasting influence fitness and weight loss? Dude, I feel like we've covered the weight loss side of this so many times. In general, I will just make the high level statement. Usually when people onboard intermittent fasting, they go into a caloric deficit because they're just simply eating less food. That is generally what's going on there. So there's no magic to intermittent fasting in that sense in terms of weight loss. It doesn't speed up metabolism. It doesn't, speed up fat loss or fat metabolism or anything else. The fat loss that you generally see from people is included in weight loss that's occurring, whether that's from lean tissue and fat or just lean tissue or just fat. Whatever, it's coming because we're in a caloric deficit. So that's kind of where I want to leave it on the weight loss side of things. Let's talk about the fitness side of things and how intermittent fasting can impact your fitness and I think more specifically your performance.
Yeah, I would say the fitness and performance side of things maybe hasn't been bludgeoned to death quite as much as the weight loss side of things.
Yeah.
And I think, it's intermittent fasting. So I would say that timing is going to be the biggest component there as far as where are you fitting in your workouts, or if you have to perform athletically, your competition, your event, where are you fitting that in relation to your fasting windows versus your feeding windows? So, some people struggle to work out fasted. So if you are, say you're doing the kind of typical 16-8 schedule and you don't eat until 1 o'clock, but you need to get in a hard workout at 7 a.m., how exactly are you making it through that workout? How are you performing in that workout? Or, are you going to need to shift things where maybe you eat in the morning and you stop eating at 5 p.m. or something like that? So I could say that's a benefit of intermittent fasting, is that you don't necessarily have to skip breakfast. I think everybody thinks, intermittent fasting, don't eat breakfast. I don't eat until lunch, and that's how you do it. You could flip that around where, maybe your eating window starts at 6 a.m. So you go into your workout fed, you perform well, and then you have an early dinner and you don't eat, again for, into the evening. So that would be the one thing, probably the biggest thing that I would say. If you get to the kind of, the more like extreme versions of intermittent fasting, like an OMAD, like a 1 meal a day type of thing, that seems kind of difficult in my mind as far as making sure that you're adequately fueled for your workouts. Ultimately, it comes down to total intake throughout the day. So that could also be a potential pitfall of intermittent fasting, is you are in a caloric deficit and you're trying to build muscle, and those two things aren't going to add up. So you could still intermittent fast and get in, and still hit maintenance or still even hit a surplus. The surplus, that is going to be more difficult depending on how large or how small your eating window is. Like, for example, like that kind of extreme case of an OMAD style, and you're trying to be in a surplus with 1 meal a day.
Yeah,
that's going to be a big ass meal.
luck.
So those are some things that you need to keep in mind as far as, when do I need to perform physically, and how do I structure my fasting period versus my eating window around that time.
That's interesting because, like you said, we've talked about the fat loss component, and I think a lot of people see the value, and even if they're not, really doing this in a structured way, but they say they're doing intermittent fasting because they skip breakfast. Like that's the super common thing. But when you really get into like a high level of performance, I don't really see, I don't see anyone who has a high level of performance really doing this, especially to the extreme where they're doing like 1 meal a day. I don't see how that works in a structured component. I don't see how that works from a digestive component. I don't see how that works from your ability to have a good output. So I think that's a consideration too, that like it's kind of like you said, there's these contrasting goals of, if you have these goals of increasing your strength or performance or whatever, but you're also trying to do intermittent fasting, like those might be competing goals.
Might be
That's
some
something to really
clashing,
think about.
and
it might be possible, kind of like we talked about with like being a vegan or vegetarian, but you have to try a lot harder. So that's the thing, a consideration. Whenever you put constraints on your diet and whether foods you do or don't eat or a time schedule like this, those constraints are going to make it where you have to have more considerations to be successful. So that's always what you have to think about. So.
Yeah, a couple other considerations here just as we close that one up. And that is like, so if you're working in this intermittent fasting, time restricted feeding windows where you've got an 8-hour window and you have to get everything in, typically that 8-hour window is also crossing over what people generally do as adults, and that is they got to go to work, they have a job, they have something that they have to be aware of. So there's a few things, like if you need to get in all your calories, all your macros and your micros and your total number of calories for the day, you're going to need to be putting those things in throughout the day. So the considerations would be making sure you have portable food that can go with you, that is easily consumed, at whatever your job or whatever your daily activities are. So pre-planning is important, having things, around, being careful that those things don't all turn into, highly processed, maybe less nutritiously, but more calorically dense foods. I think that's a trap that a lot of people, it's more bars, it's more powders, right? It's more things in packages and things.
Convenience foods.
And they're not all together bad, but what you start to see and what I've seen is what you've adopted there in terms of time restricted feeding starts to, the balance of those things starts to get off a little bit, right? It's not for everybody, but that's a thing to think about. Things, other things to think about, like, again, if you're working out, you're lifting weights, your goal is to build muscle and you're doing that 3 to 5 days a week or whatever, is having those calories available to you while you're doing your workout. Because when you start to take that 8-hour period and you start to divide up, well, some of it's commute time, I could eat there, right? And let's say it's workout time. So that's an hour and a half. So now you're down to 6.5 hours of that feeding window that you have to be in. Having calories to onboard, maybe in a liquid form, again, that's your protein, maybe a little carbohydrate powder or whatever else, or a bar that you're able to slam in between sets or something like that, while at the gym is a good way to kind of make sure you're meeting your needs across the board, throughout the day. So for some people, this can be really convenient. And for some people, it's just this weird connection with weight loss. I want weight loss, right? I want weight loss. One meal a day makes good conventional sense. Well, if I'm only eating one meal a day, like I'm eating and I'm getting I'm getting protein, and it's protein heavy for that, but I'm still not meeting my total need. So going back to the time restricted feeding and how it impacts you in your fitness and as an athlete is, do you have a sense of what that is? And is this realistic for you, right? Before you've planted your flag and gone, because I do this, I should get this result. So, stepping back, if you've adopted this and trying to understand, am I getting all the things that I need in? Because here's the thing, like, and again, with time restricted feeding, intermittent fasting, I started this with the weight loss conversation, not wanting to handle that, but that's usually where it goes, right away, is because once I get into that caloric deficit, right, and I've shifted to this, and maybe I've adopted an exercise program at that same time, because that's what generally people do a lot, is like, hey, I'm going to start eating better and I want to start working out. So now you've upped your caloric output as well as decreased your caloric intake. And what happens? You lose weight, right? You lose weight. And a lot of times that initially comes from fat, especially for men who have, generally speaking, a higher level of muscle mass and hormones on board that will support that a little bit more. And it, quote unquote, works until it doesn't, right? And then we start to do really weird shit. Like, well, some of those psychological and emotional impacts could be impacted. And now you're starting to find yourself reaching for foods that you wouldn't typically eat, even though it's inside your eating window, right? But the other thing is like, oh, I need to eat less. Well, you're already in that deficit. Is that really what you need, right? Or I need to work out more. Well, you're increasing that caloric output. And again, that might work a little bit for a little while until your body metabolically adapts, and then it's not anymore. And it kind of digs people into a hole. So if you're working through intermittent fasting, if you're working through this time restricted feeding is another kind of word for it. I would, again, going back to the OMAD style, like I can't get on board with that.
It's an extreme.
It is definitely kind of one of those all the way on one side versus the other type of things. I like to kind of work more from the middle and try to work out, to what works best for people. But my point being there is have a high level of awareness of what your needs are, what you're supposed to be getting in, and how you're going to do that before you decide I'm only doing it in 8 hours. Right? Does that make sense? Like, I'm trying to drive, we live in San Jose. I'm trying to drive to Los Angeles, right? Los Angeles from here is about a 6-hour drive, right? And that's doing about 75 most of the way, right? If I said, I'm going to make it there in 4.5 hours, is that realistic, right? Maybe, but there's a lot of risk and a lot of things that are going to come up with that. And there's too many unknowns. Right? There's things that come up during the day, like there's an accident, right? There's traffic, there's construction, there's whatever. Those things happen. And that's where I think restricting yourself like that starts to, I'm not trying to discourage people from what maybe be working for them well, or, getting into one of these things. But at the same time, just think about this longer term. And why are you doing this? And is it really realistic for you long term? It might work for a few months, might work for a year, but what about the next couple of months or the next year? So just keep your head wrapped around that on that side of things. But fitness, performance-wise, It's all going to come down to the calories in, the macronutrient profile going in, the micronutrient profile going in. How are you recovering? How is your body responding? And if you don't have an awareness of those things, right, you're not doing some type of tracking, you don't have a baseline for measuring that stuff, you're probably going to be one of those people that just has a lot of anecdotes for why this is the right diet for you.